A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Herman, I was looking at some industry reports this morning, and it struck me just how bizarre the branding in high-tech has become. We are living in an era where the most critical infrastructure for the most transformative technology in human history is represented by a yellow smiley face with two hands reaching out for a hug. It is a bit surreal when you think about it. We have these massive, multi-billion-dollar compute clusters, liquid-cooled data centers, and the most complex mathematical structures ever conceived by man, and yet the gateway to all of it is a literal emoji.
It really is, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, the contrast between the name Hugging Face and the sheer industrial power they wield is one of my favorite things about the current AI landscape. It is the ultimate disarming tactic. Our housemate Daniel actually sent us a prompt about this very thing. He wanted us to look past the cute emoji and the surface-level reputation of being just a place to download models. He is curious about how they became the central nervous system of the entire AI world. As of today, March 11th, 2026, they are hosting over 1.5 million models and 300,000 datasets. That is not just a repository, that is a Library of Alexandria that actually works.
It is a great question from Daniel because Hugging Face is everywhere now. If you are a developer, a researcher, or even just a hobbyist messing around with local large language models, you are interacting with their ecosystem whether you realize it or not. They have moved far beyond being a simple repository. Today we are going to peel back those layers. We are going to look at the history, the technical architecture that made them the standard, and why their role as a neutral, open platform is so vital, especially when you consider the geopolitical and philosophical stakes of who controls artificial intelligence.
And I think to really understand Hugging Face, you have to look at the evolution of what we call the Hugging Face stack. We often talk about the GitHub of AI, which is the common shorthand for them, but that actually undersells what they do. GitHub hosts code. Hugging Face hosts code, yes, but they also host the weights, which are the massive binary files that actually make the models work. They host the datasets, which are the fuel. They provide the compute through their Spaces platform. And perhaps most importantly, they provide the software libraries like transformers, datasets, accelerate, and diffusers that allow all these different pieces to talk to each other.
Right. It is about standardization. Before Hugging Face really took over, if you wanted to move from a Google model to a Facebook model, or from a research paper's implementation to a production environment, you were basically rewriting everything from scratch. It was a fragmented mess. It was like trying to build a car where every single bolt used a different type of thread and every gas station used a different nozzle.
It was the Wild West, Corn. You had different frameworks like TensorFlow and PyTorch fighting for dominance, and every research team had their own idiosyncratic way of loading data and saving weights. Hugging Face came in and essentially built the bridge. They created a common language for machine learning. And what is fascinating is that they did not start out intending to do this. They were not founded as an infrastructure company. They were a chatbot company.
That is the part that always kills me. Back in 2016, when Clement DeLong, Julian Schumann, and Thomas Wolfe started the company, they were building a chatbot for teenagers. It was an iOS app. It was supposed to be this quirky, emotional AI friend. They were literally trying to build the movie Her, but for the Gen Z crowd. They wanted to create an AI that you could just hang out with, talk about your day, and develop a digital relationship with.
It is true. They were based in New York and Paris, and their whole pitch to investors was about personality and emotional intelligence in AI. But to build that chatbot, their technical team had to work with the early transformer models that were coming out of Google Research, specifically BERT, which stands for Bidirectional Encoder Representations from Transformers. They realized that the tools they were building internally to make their chatbot work, specifically the code to load these complex models into PyTorch, were actually far more valuable than the chatbot itself.
It is a classic pivot. They open sourced their PyTorch implementation of BERT in late 2018, and the research community just latched onto it. I remember seeing the growth of that repository. It was exponential because, for the first time, a researcher could download a state-of-the-art model with literally 3 lines of Python code. We talked about the accidental dominance of Python back in episode 1021, and Hugging Face is a huge part of why that happened. They made Python the interface for the AI revolution.
That Transformers library was the catalyst. But what I find technically impressive is how they managed the abstraction. They did not just make it easy to use, they made it framework agnostic. You could use the same Hugging Face code to run a model in PyTorch or TensorFlow or JAX. That kind of interoperability is incredibly hard to pull off. It requires a deep understanding of how these different engines handle tensors and gradients. By building that abstraction layer, they became the neutral ground. Nobody felt like they were being locked into a specific big tech ecosystem. If you used the Transformers library, you were free to move between Google's hardware and Meta's frameworks.
And that neutrality is key, especially from our perspective. We have seen how big tech companies can become gatekeepers. When you have a platform like Hugging Face that is independent, it allows for a much more decentralized and, frankly, pro-innovation environment. It prevents a single entity from having a monopoly on the tools of creation. But Herman, let's talk about the hub itself. Because the library is one thing, but the actual hosting of these massive files is a different beast entirely.
You are right. Once they had the library, they realized they needed a place for people to share the actual model weights. You have to remember, these model files are huge. In 2026, we're talking about 70 billion, 400 billion, or even trillion parameter models. These are gigabytes or even terabytes of data. You cannot just check a 70 billion parameter model into a standard GitHub repository. GitHub is designed for text-based code, not massive binary blobs. It would choke the system.
So they built the hub, and they did it using Git Large File Storage, or LFS. This was a brilliant move because it kept the workflow familiar to developers. You use the same version control concepts you already know, commits, branches, pulls, and pushes, but it is optimized for the scale of modern AI. It allowed for versioning of models, which is something the industry desperately needed.
And the hub solved the discovery problem. Before the hub, if you read a research paper about a new vision model or a new language model, you had to go hunt for a random Google Drive link or a semi-broken Dropbox folder that the researcher had posted. Half the time, the link was dead, or the weights were in a format you could not open, or you had no idea what version of the code was used to produce those weights. Hugging Face centralized that. They made it so that every model had a home, a standardized page with a model card.
We did a whole episode on model cards, episode 651, for those who want to dive into the documentation aspect. But the point is, they turned models into products that you could actually browse and compare. And that led to the OpenLLM leaderboard, which I think has been one of the most influential things in the last few years. It turned model development into a transparent, competitive sport.
The leaderboard changed everything. It forced companies to be honest about their benchmarks. Before the leaderboard, every company would release a technical report claiming their model was the best in the world based on their own internal tests. It was all marketing. But with the OpenLLM leaderboard, if you claim your new model is better than Llama 3, you have to submit it to the hub, and the community will test it on a standardized set of evaluations. It created this rapid feedback loop where open weights models started catching up to the proprietary ones from OpenAI and Google.
You mentioned open weights there, Herman. I think we should clarify that distinction for the listeners, because it is something we covered in episode 70, but it bears repeating. Most of what is on Hugging Face is not strictly open source in the traditional sense, right?
That is an important nuance. True open source, according to the Open Source Initiative, requires the training data, the training code, and the weights to be fully available and freely modifiable. Most of the top models on the hub, like the ones from Mistral or Meta, are open weights. You get the final product, the neural network itself, but the exact recipe and the massive pile of data used to cook it are still a bit of a secret. However, Hugging Face provides the infrastructure for both. They are the primary distribution point for the uncensored models we talked about in episode 847. If a model is too restricted by corporate guardrails, the community will fine-tune an uncensored version and host it on Hugging Face.
That is where the pro-freedom aspect really shines. Hugging Face does not act as a nanny. They have terms of service, obviously, to prevent illegal content, but they generally allow the community to experiment and innovate without the heavy-handed editorializing we see from some of the big California tech giants. It is a marketplace of ideas, but for neural networks. If you want a model that speaks like a pirate, or a model that is specialized in ancient Sumerian, you can find it there.
And it is not just the models. The datasets library is arguably just as important. In the early days, if you wanted to train a model on a specific dataset like Common Crawl or Wikipedia, you had to write custom scripts to download, clean, and format all that data. It was a week of work before you even started training. With the Hugging Face datasets library, you could load millions of rows of data into memory in a streaming fashion with one line of code.
They use the Apache Arrow format under the hood, right? For efficiency.
It is all about memory mapping. You do not have to load the whole 50 gigabyte dataset into your RAM. You can stream it directly from the disk or the cloud as the model is training. This lowered the barrier to entry for small teams and individual researchers. It democratized the ability to do high-level AI research. You do not need a 3,000-person army, like we discussed in episode 1067, just to handle the data engineering anymore. Hugging Face is your data engineering team.
Let's talk about that connection to the 3,000-person army concept. In episode 1067, we talked about how the biggest models require this massive logistical effort. Thousands of people labeling data, testing outputs, and managing infrastructure. Hugging Face is the platform that allows that army to be decentralized. You might have 1,000 developers across 60 different countries all collaborating on a single project, like the Big Science Project.
The Big Science Project is the perfect example. That was a year-long research workshop that Hugging Face coordinated. It involved over 1,000 researchers from 60 countries and 250 institutions. They worked together to train BLOOM, which was one of the first truly massive multilingual open-source language models. Hugging Face provided the coordination, the data tools, and the platform for the weights. It proved that the community could compete with the massive labs if they had the right infrastructure.
It is about the democratization of compute too. Let's talk about spaces. It is essentially a way to take a model you have found or built and turn it into a live interactive web app in about 5 minutes.
Spaces is a game changer for prototyping. They use Gradio and Streamlit, which are these Python frameworks for building simple user interfaces. You can write a little bit of Python code, point it at a model on the hub, and suddenly you have a web page where people can actually play with the AI. Hugging Face provides the hosting for that. They have thousands of these spaces running at any given time, showcasing everything from image generators to real-time voice clones. It allows a researcher to show their work to the world immediately, rather than just publishing a static paper.
And they offer inference endpoints too. That is for the more serious production use cases. If you are a company and you want to run a private instance of a model without managing your own Kubernetes cluster or dealing with the complexity of cloud providers like AWS or Azure, you just click a button on Hugging Face. They handle the scaling, the GPUs, and the security. They are essentially becoming an AI native cloud provider.
It is the natural evolution of the platform. They started with the code, then the weights, then the data, and now the compute. They have built a vertical stack that covers the entire lifecycle of an AI project. And because they are integrated with all the major cloud providers, they are not really competing with Amazon or Google. They are acting as the specialized interface for them. If you want to run a Hugging Face model on Amazon SageMaker, there is a dedicated integration for that. They have made themselves the indispensable layer between the raw hardware and the final application.
It makes sense from a business perspective. They are positioning themselves as the toll booth on the road to AI development. But I wonder about the sustainability of it, Herman. Serving petabytes of data for free to the community is incredibly expensive. They have raised hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital, and they are valued at billions of dollars. Do you think they can maintain that community first? Open access ethos as the pressure to monetize grows. We have seen other platforms start open and then slowly close the gates once they have a monopoly.
It is the billion-dollar question. So far, they have been very smart about it. They monetize the enterprise features, private hubs for companies who don't want to share their models, dedicated support, and managed compute while keeping the public research side free. It is the GitHub model, essentially. As long as they remain the place where the best researchers want to share their work, they have an incredible amount of leverage. If they ever started charging researchers to host models, the community would probably migrate to a more open alternative, and they know that. Their value is the community, not just the files.
I also think their role in the geopolitical landscape is interesting, since they are a bridge between the American and European tech scenes, with their dual headquarters in New York and Paris, and they have a very global contributor base. They are a bit harder to regulate or shut down than a single US-based company might be. They represent a more distributed, decentralized vision of AI power.
That is a great point. When we talk about American leadership in AI, a lot of people focus on OpenAI or Anthropic. But Hugging Face is a massive part of that leadership because it is the platform that the rest of the world uses to build on top of American-designed architectures. It projects soft power by setting the standards. If the whole world is using the Transformers library, they are playing by the rules that this ecosystem established. It is like how the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world, the Hugging Face API is the reserve language of machine learning.
Let's dive a bit deeper into the technical side of the hub itself. I was reading about how they handle model versioning. It is not just about the weights, it is about the entire environment. One of the biggest headaches in AI is when you download a model and it doesn't work because your version of a library is 0.1% different from the researcher's version.
Right. One of the biggest problems in machine learning is reproducibility. Hugging Face has been pushing for things like the Accelerate library, which helps you run the same code on any hardware setup, whether it is a single laptop or a massive cluster of 800 GPUs. They are trying to solve the "it works on my machine" problem for AI. They also use Docker containers and specialized environments in spaces to ensure that if a model works today, it will still work in 2 years.
And they have expanded into so many different domains. It is not just text anymore. The hub has expanded into computer vision, audio, robotics, and even biology. You can find protein folding models and climate change simulation data on there. They are truly trying to be the hub for all of machine learning. I saw a project on there recently that was using transformers to predict wildfire spread based on satellite imagery. The data, the model, and the demo were all hosted on Hugging Face.
That is the power of the ecosystem. It allows for cross-pollination. A researcher in biology can use the same Transformers library that was developed for language to analyze DNA sequences. They don't have to learn a whole new set of tools. This speed of transfer is why we are seeing such rapid progress across so many different fields at once.
I think one of the most underrated parts of their success is the documentation. Their tutorials and blog posts are gold standards in the industry. They do not just provide the tool, they teach you how to use it. They have this Hugging Face course that is completely free and takes you from zero to building your own transformer models.
Their educational content is a huge part of their moat. They have hired some of the best educators in the field. If you want to learn how to fine-tune a model, the first place you go is the Hugging Face documentation. By the time you have finished the tutorial, you are already using their libraries and their hub. It is a very effective way to build a loyal user base. It is the teach a man to fish approach, but you also happen to be the one selling the high-tech fishing rods.
So, for the developers listening, or even for people who are just curious about where this is all going, what is the practical takeaway here? How should they be thinking about Hugging Face in their daily work?
The first takeaway is, do not reinvent the wheel. If you are starting an AI project, the first thing you should do is check the hub. There is a 99% chance that someone has already done 80% of the work for you. Whether it is a pre-trained model that you can fine-tune or a clean data set that matches your use case, it is probably already there. Leveraging the hub's existing APIs will save you months of development time.
And for researchers, I would say the takeaway is the importance of transparency. Using model cards and data cards is not just a chore, it is how you build trust. In an era of deepfakes and misinformation, being able to trace the provenance of a model and understand its training data is going to be vital for any kind of professional or ethical application. If you want your work to be taken seriously in 2026, it needs to be on the hub with full documentation.
And I would add that people should pay attention to the community projects, things like the Open Medical LLM Leaderboard, or the various efforts to create high-quality open-source datasets for low-resource languages. That is where the real innovation is happening. It is not always in the shiny press releases from the big labs, it is in the incremental improvements made by thousands of developers collaborating on the hub.
It is also worth keeping an eye on the uncensored movement we mentioned. Hugging Face is the primary battleground for the debate over AI safety versus freedom of speech. By hosting these models, they are forcing us to have the conversation about who gets to decide what an AI is allowed to say or do. They are providing the infrastructure for a more pluralistic AI future, where different models can have different personalities or values based on what the user needs.
It is a heavy responsibility for a company with a hugging emoji as its logo, but they seem to be handling it with a lot of maturity. They have managed to stay out of the most toxic parts of the culture wars while still providing a platform for genuine open inquiry. They are the adults in the room, even if the room is decorated with yellow smiley faces.
That is the balance, isn't it? Being a neutral platform in a highly polarized time, it is a difficult needle to thread. Herman, as we look toward the future, do you think Hugging Face will stay as a software and platform layer, or will they move even deeper into the stack?
I think we are going to see Hugging Face move even more into the hardware space, not by building chips themselves, but by making it easier for new chip companies to support their models. If you're a startup building a new AI accelerator to compete with NVIDIA, the first thing you do is write a Hugging Face integration. If your chip can run the Transformers library out of the box, you have an instant market of millions of developers. They are becoming the universal driver for AI hardware.
It is the ultimate platform play. They have become the interface between the software and the hardware. It is a very powerful position to be in. It prevents any one hardware vendor from having too much control. If the software is portable via Hugging Face, then the hardware becomes a commodity, which drives down prices and increases innovation for everyone.
And that is good for the whole ecosystem. It keeps the market competitive and ensures that the power of AI isn't concentrated in just one or two companies.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I have to say, my respect for that little yellow emoji has gone up quite a bit today. It is a reminder that in tech, sometimes the most playful-looking things are actually the most profound. It is the soft interface to the hardest technology we have ever built.
Well put, Corn. It has been a lot of fun digging into this. And I think Daniel really hit on something important here. Hugging Face is not just a company, it is a cultural shift in how we build technology. It is a shift toward collaboration, transparency, and decentralization. It is the realization that we are all smarter together than we are in our individual silos.
Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that if you are enjoying these deep dives into the plumbing of the AI world, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other curious minds find the show and keeps us going. We are aiming to hit our next milestone of listeners by the end of the month, and every review counts.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And if you want to check out our archive, we have over 1,000 episodes now covering everything from battery chemistry to the philosophy of consciousness. You can find all of them at myweirdprompts.com. There is a search bar there so you can look up any topic we have mentioned today, like episode 847 on uncensored models or episode 1067 on the massive scale of AI production.
We are also on Spotify, so make sure to follow us there to get new episodes as soon as they drop. Thanks again to our housemate Daniel for the prompt that started this whole conversation. It is always good to have an excuse to look under the hood of the tools we use every day.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Herman Poppleberry.
And I am Corn Poppleberry. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.
Until next time, stay curious.
You know, Herman, I was just thinking as we were finishing up, if Hugging Face is the central nervous system, what is the brain? Is it the models themselves, Or is it the collective intelligence of the community using them?
That is a deep one to end on, Corn. I would argue it is the community. A model without a user is just a big file of numbers. It is the researchers and developers on the hub who give those numbers meaning. They are the ones directing the energy, finding the use cases, and pushing the boundaries of what the math can actually do. The model is the tool, but the community is the craftsman.
I like that. The human element is still at the center, even in a world of billion parameter models. The emoji is a hug, after all. It is a human gesture.
Always. All right, let's go see if Daniel has any more ideas for us. I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our exploration into the infrastructure of the future.
Sounds like a plan. See you, everyone.
Take care.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My weird prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep